"You're not invited," my daughter said without a hint of hesitation. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply stood up, nodded, and walked away in silence. But what she didn't know was, by the time the event began, the venue, the caterer, and even the dress were all paid for by me. Before we dive into the story, we'll love to thank you for your continued support to this channel. If you enjoy this story and stories like this, kindly subscribe and hit on the notification button so you don't miss any of our stories. We will love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments section. We'll love to give you a shout out in our next video. Now let's begin. The moment she said it, the world around me froze. "You're not invited," she said, without a tremble, without a blink, without even a flicker of hesitation in her voice. Her eyes didn't soften. Her mouth didn't falter. She just stood there, arms folded like a wall I'd never climb again. I stood in her doorway, holding the gift I had picked up on the way over, a simple necklace, the kind I thought she'd wear proudly on her big day. But it suddenly felt ridiculous in my hand, like a misplaced memory from a story I no longer belonged to. I didn't ask why. I didn't argue. I didn't plead for space at her side. Instead, I nodded, slowly, like a man walking away from the ruins of a home he built with his own bare hands. And maybe that's exactly what it was. I turned, walked back to my car, and sat behind the wheel. For a long time, I couldn't start the engine. My fingers just hovered above the keys. My eyes burned, but I kept blinking it back. My heart throbbed in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not since the day her mother and I split, and she chose not to stay with me. That day hurt. But this wasn't just loss. This was erasure. She hadn't simply uninvited me from the wedding. She'd uninvited me from her life. As I sat there, I remembered the first time I held her. How small she was. How loud she cried. How terrified I was that I'd mess it all up. And yet, somehow, we had made it through those early years together. Just the two of us while her mom finished law school. I was the bedtime story reader, the math tutor, the ponytail wrangler who always got the part too tight or too crooked. I was her superhero, her constant. So how did we get here? I drove away that day without knowing the answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I feared the truth. Maybe it was easier for her to write me out of her story than admit I still mattered. Maybe my quiet presence in her life reminded her of a version of herself she no longer wanted to claim. Or maybe, just maybe, I had failed her in a way I couldn't see. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed and replayed our last 5 conversations in my head. I noticed things now I hadn't seen before. Her clipped responses, the cold formality in her tone, the way she said, "Thank you," like it was a contract she needed to fulfill, not a feeling she genuinely felt. And still, every time she needed something, I showed up, on time, without question, and without expectation. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I taught her that my love didn't come with boundaries. Maybe I gave too much room for her to forget I was a person too. But knowing that didn't stop the ache in my chest. It didn't stop the sound of her words repeating like a loop. "You're not invited. You're not invited. You're not invited." I couldn't sleep. Not because of anger, but because of mourning. I grieved not just the wedding I wouldn't attend, but the fatherhood I felt had been quietly stripped from me. I grieved the idea that one day she might have children and they would never know me, not because I passed away, but because I was written out like an unwanted footnote. I looked over at the necklace still in its box on my nightstand. I hadn't left it with her. Couldn't. It felt wrong to give a gift to someone who no longer recognized the hands that offered it. I should have been angry. I should have ranted, slammed doors, sent long messages demanding explanations. But I didn't, because love doesn't always scream when it's wounded. Sometimes it just bleeds quietly. And I was bleeding in silence. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight her choices. I wouldn't force my way into a day she clearly didn't want me to be part of. But what she didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that months ago, before the invitations were printed, before the dress was even chosen, I had already started paying for the wedding behind the scenes. And now, I had a different kind of choice to make. Should I stay hidden and keep helping her from the shadows? Or should I finally show her what a father's love looks like when it's no longer invisible? I couldn't walk past a photo frame in my hallway without being dragged back in time. They hung on the wall like still echoes, smiling snapshots of a world where my daughter used to run to me instead of from me. Her tiny fingers once wrapped around mine so tightly it felt like she believed I could hold the entire world steady just by standing there. I used to believe it too. The silence in my home was different now. It wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. A silence packed with the weight of memories that hadn't been dusted in years. Every corner reminded me of bedtime songs, lost teeth, scraped knees, and late-night school projects we tackled with cheap glue and laughter. She used to look at me like I was the sun. Now I wasn't even a shadow in her sky. After the divorce, I did what I thought was best, gave her the freedom to choose, gave her space to grow. Her mother was more financially stable, more polished, and to a young girl looking for structure in chaos, maybe I seemed too worn out, too tired. I didn't fight the decision when she chose her mother's home full-time. I told myself she'd come back when she was ready. But years passed, and all I got were polite calls on Father's Day and robotic happy birthdays sent via text. I try not to take it personally. Kids grow, things change. But deep down, I was still that dad in the school pickup line who waved like a fool, trying to catch her attention as if every moment together was gold. Maybe I held on too tightly to the past, hoping it would mean something in the present. Maybe I loved her so loudly she grew numb to the sound. One night after her high school graduation, I offered to take her out to dinner, just the two of us. She said she already had plans with her friends. I understood, of course I did. But when I saw the photos online later, it wasn't friends she dined with. It was her mom and stepfather. I wasn't even a footnote. I remember sitting on the porch afterward, beer in hand, staring out at the dark. I remember whispering, "Did I do something wrong?" Not to anyone in particular, just to the stars. I never got an answer, only more silence. Still, I kept showing up, quietly, gently. I never missed a tuition payment. I sent groceries when I heard through her aunt that things were tight. I even paid for her car repairs once, wiring the money through her cousin so she wouldn't know it came from me. That's the thing about love. It doesn't need to be seen to be real. But even invisible love has its limits. When I heard about the wedding plans, I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this would be the moment we reconnect. I didn't want to walk her down the aisle for recognition or validation. I just wanted her to know I still saw her, still chose her, every day. But instead, I got 3 words: "You're not invited." I sat in my living room for hours that night, flipping through old yearbooks, scribbled Father's Day cards, and finger-painted drawings that once said "Daddy's girl" in crooked letters. What happened to that girl? When did her heart shut the door on me? I pulled out the shoebox I kept tucked away in the closet. Inside were receipts, not just financial ones, but emotional. Movie ticket stubs from her first theater trip. A lock of her hair from her first haircut. A note she wrote in 2nd grade. "You are the best daddy ever." I held that paper like it was glass, fragile and fading. And yet, despite all the sorrow, I couldn't stop caring. I couldn't shut it off. I didn't know how. I had already paid the venue deposit months earlier, before I knew I wasn't invited. Her mother had called in a panic about their budget. I stepped in quietly, no questions asked. It wasn't about pride. It was about making sure my daughter had the day she dreamed of. That's what fathers do, even when their hearts are no longer part of the celebration. Then came the dress. A boutique designer piece her mother couldn't afford. I paid it in full, anonymously, through the bridal shop manager I once helped years ago. She never even asked where the sudden approval came from. She just picked it up, smiling, unaware that her reflection in the mirror was built on my sacrifice. That's what made it hurt more. I wasn't just forgotten. I was erased from the foundation itself. Still, I kept going. Not for recognition, not for applause, but because some debts love takes on willingly, even when the heart is breaking. I didn't need to be seen. But somewhere deep down, I still hoped maybe she'd remember. Maybe something in her would whisper, "He never left." Not really. I wasn't invited. But I never left the room. And I was beginning to realize that maybe I didn't need an invitation to show up. Maybe all I needed was the will to love without condition. But the real question now was, would I keep paying for a wedding that didn't want my name attached? Would I continue to build a day I wasn't allowed to witness? Or was it time she finally learned the weight of what she'd chosen to leave behind? The truth is, I could have walked away. I could have pulled every penny back the moment she told me I wasn't welcome. I could have called the venue, the caterer, the florist, and told them to cancel every single booking I had made. I could have watched her wedding fall apart in real time, let the silence and confusion shake her into remembering the man she chose to forget. But I didn't, because that's not who I am. I don't give love to be seen. I give love because it's mine to give. The wedding preparations moved forward like clockwork. I stayed in the background, communicating quietly through the vendors I had long relationships with. I had helped the venue owner's daughter get her first scholarship. I paid for the caterer's equipment upgrade years ago when he hit a rough patch. I had always been that guy, the one who helped when no one else knew. So when I asked them not to mention my name as the payee, they didn't question it. They just nodded, with a heaviness in their eyes that told me they understood more than they were allowed to say. The florist called me one evening in tears. She said my daughter had come in, bright-eyed, flipping through flower samples like the world was perfect. The florist wanted to speak up, to say you have no idea who's holding this up for you. But she didn't. She honored my silence. That hurt more than I expected, not because I wanted recognition, but because I realized how deep my loneliness ran. I was pouring love into a celebration that treated me like a stranger. Still, I signed the checks, reviewed the spreadsheets, and made sure no detail was overlooked. I even upgraded the photographer's package quietly, because I knew, years from now, she'd want those memories framed, even if I wasn't in them. Some nights, I'd sit in my recliner and imagine the moment she'd walk down the aisle. I'd picture her in the dress I helped purchase, surrounded by flowers I had selected, standing under a chandelier whose installation I funded. I'd imagine her smile, wide and gleaming, and it would tear something open inside me. Because while everyone else would be clapping, cheering, and taking pictures, I'd be sitting at home, alone, forgotten. But even in that pain, I found a strange kind of peace. You see, love, real love, doesn't need applause. It doesn't keep a scoreboard. It doesn't say, "You owe me." It simply gives, even when it hurts. And I had hurt more than I ever thought possible. Sometimes I wondered if she ever thought of me during the planning. If her heart paused for even a moment to remember who always stood in the shadows holding her up. Or maybe she had convinced herself that her stepfather's money, her mother's presence, and her friend's praise were enough to erase my fingerprints from her life. If so, she was mistaken. Because my fingerprints were everywhere, on every piece of her joy, every inch of her safety, every moment of her becoming. She just didn't see them. There was a moment, a brief one, where I nearly sent her a message. Just a sentence. "I'm still here." But I deleted it. Not out of pride, but because I had learned, love that has to announce itself has already been denied too many times. I wasn't looking for a seat at the wedding. I wasn't hoping for a thank you speech or even a photo together. I just wanted her to be happy. That was the curse and the blessing of being her father. Even in heartbreak, I still wanted her day to be perfect. And yet, part of me feared what would happen after. After the music stopped. After the decorations were gone. After the people went home. Would she ever sit in the quiet and wonder, who made all of this happen? Would she ever feel a tug in her chest, a whisper that said, "He never left you"? Not really. I doubted it. But I hoped. Quietly, without expectations. Because sometimes, hope is the only thing that keeps love alive. I stayed hidden. Not because I didn't care, but because my care had never been about being seen. I had learned how to give in secret, to love in silence. And yet, it didn't make the ache any easier to carry. What she didn't know was that everything she stood on, the floor beneath her feet, the beauty surrounding her, The comfort that wrapped around her wedding day was built on the quiet devotion of a man who wasn't even invited. And still, I showed up, not in person, not in photos, but in every silent gift that made her day possible. The morning of the wedding arrived like a whisper I couldn't shut out. The sky outside my window was the kind of clear that felt rehearsed, like even the weather knew something sacred was happening. I sat at the edge of my bed, fully dressed, though I had nowhere to be. I stared at my phone, wondering if, by some miracle, she would call. Even just a text. Just one word, come. But the screen remained cold and blank. I wasn't invited. That part hadn't changed. Still, I knew exactly what time the ceremony would begin. I knew the schedule better than most of the bridal party. I'd built that schedule from scratch with the wedding planner, working after hours and double-checking vendor confirmations when she needed help. She didn't know, of course. She just thought everything was working like magic. But the magic had a cost, and it wore my name on every invoice. A cousin of mine, a quiet girl with a big heart, had offered to stream the wedding for me through her phone. She said she'd keep it low and discreet. I had hesitated at first, unsure if my heart could take it. But curiosity and love are hard to separate. So when the time came, I clicked the link she sent. My screen came alive. There she was, my daughter, standing in the hallway of the venue I paid for, beneath lights I had personally upgraded when I heard the original setup was faulty. She looked radiant. She truly did. Like the version of her mother I once fell in love with, but with more softness in her face, more steadiness in her posture. She was beautiful, and I was invisible. I sat frozen as the music started and the doors opened. She took her first steps down the aisle, not with me at her side, but with her stepfather. He walked proudly, nodding to the guests, his chest puffed out like he had earned this moment. Maybe in her eyes, he had. I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I felt a small fracture in my chest as I watched the daughter I once carried on my shoulders choose someone else to give her away. I watched the ceremony unfold like a ghost on the outside of glass. Every smile, every tear, every toast, I saw it all. I could almost smell the flowers I had paid extra for. I recognized the soft piano version of her favorite childhood lullaby playing in the background. That was my idea. She had once fallen asleep every night to that tune. I thought it might touch something deep in her, stir a memory. But her face didn't change when it played. Maybe it was just background noise to her now. The speeches came. People laughed. People cried. No one mentioned me. Not once. And yet, my fingerprints were everywhere. In the plated desserts that were added last minute after her mother panicked about the menu. In the emergency generator I arranged when the venue reported possible power issues. In the dress, hemmed to perfection, thanks to the tailor I had paid overtime for. I watched her dance, gracefully, joyfully, with the man she chose to marry. And I whispered, "Be happy," to a screen that didn't hear me. My throat tightened, my hands trembled. But still, I didn't turn it off. I watched her laugh with her bridesmaids, pose for pictures, hold a champagne glass as the room clinked in her honor. All while I sat in the dim glow of my small living room, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. I couldn't feel the music. I couldn't taste the food. But I could feel the weight of what I had built for her, and the ache of not being part of it. My phone buzzed once. A message from the same cousin. "You did this. She just doesn't know it yet." I read it twice. And then once more. And I felt something between pride and sorrow settle in my chest. Because she was right. I had done this. I had pieced together every delicate detail of this day, even after being cut out. I had loved from a distance, loved without applause, loved without conditions. I had stood in the shadows not because I was weak, but because sometimes shadows are where the strongest hearts stand when they know the spotlight belongs to someone else. And yet, even in that dark corner, I still hoped. I hoped that one day, maybe not today, maybe not even this year, but one day, she would look through her wedding photos and ask, "How did we afford this? Who made this happen?" I hoped she'd feel a flutter in her chest, a pull in her memory, and remember who had always shown up for her, even when she asked him not to. As the live stream ended and the screen went dark, I closed my laptop gently, almost like tucking a child into bed. My chest was heavy, but my hands were still. I had seen her happiest day unfold, and though I wasn't in it, I had made it happen. She might not remember me today. She might not thank me tomorrow, but the echo of my love would follow her footsteps for the rest of her life. Even from the shadows, I had been her father, and I always would be. It started with a simple white envelope. Clean. Ordinary. No fanfare. No warning. Just a quiet rectangle slipped into her mailbox, waiting like a forgotten truth. Inside it, the invoice for the wedding venue, $12,000 due in 30 days. The signature at the bottom? Hers. Not mine. Because months before the big day, I had made arrangements with every vendor. I would fund it, yes, but if I wasn't acknowledged, if I was erased, the responsibility would be passed on to the one who erased me. That was the condition. Not out of spite, not for revenge, but because I needed her to know silence comes with a cost. I had stayed silent during the planning. I stayed invisible during the vows. But silence has its limits. And now, as the final chords of her perfect day faded, reality arrived quietly, one envelope at a time. 3 days after the first invoice, the second one arrived, $4,800 for the catering, followed by $2,750 for the florist. Then the big one, $6,000 for the custom dress she swore was a gift from the bridal shop because she had won a raffle. That raffle had been me. I had made it appear effortless. Now, it was effort she had to face. I didn't reach out. I didn't warn her. Because the truth doesn't always knock loudly. It sometimes waits until the room is quiet. I knew the moment she opened that final invoice. My phone rang just after 9 p.m. Her name lit up the screen for the first time in months. I stared at it. My thumb hovered. I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity and a father's heart are both impossible to silence. So I answered. There was no hello, no greeting, just her voice, tight and confused. Why did you do this? She wasn't angry. She wasn't even crying. She was just stunned. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the photo on the wall, one of her, age 6, holding a kite I helped her build. That was the day she told me I was her favorite person in the world. I wondered if she remembered that version of us. Probably not. But I did. So I answered her simply. Because I loved you. A silence followed, thick and weighty. You weren't invited, she whispered, almost like she was saying it to herself now, as if those words had aged badly in her mouth. I know, I said. That didn't change how I felt. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. You paid for everything? I helped make your day beautiful, I replied softly. That's all I ever wanted. She went quiet again. I imagined her sitting alone in her apartment, the echo of celebration gone, holding pieces of a truth she didn't know what to do with. Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe she was confused. Maybe she was just realizing that love doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It just learns how to live quietly. I thought you didn't care anymore, she finally said. I always cared, I replied. I just stopped trying to prove it. And that was the truth. I had spent years trying to earn back a place in her life. After the divorce, after the shifting loyalties, after her mother's subtle rewrites of history, I had clung to every chance to show up. But at some point, I stopped chasing acknowledgement and started giving without expectation. Because real love doesn't beg for notice. It just keeps showing up. I didn't know, she said, voice breaking. I never needed you to know, I said. But maybe now you do. We didn't talk long after that. She didn't apologize. She didn't offer explanations. But sometimes, the quiet between two people says more than 1,000 words ever could. When the call ended, I sat in the dark for a while. Not sad. Not angry. Just full. Heavy with something I couldn't name. She would deal with the invoices. I had arranged it that way. Not to punish her, but to let her feel the weight of what she had dismissed, to teach her that love, while silent, is never cheap. And sometimes, when taken for granted, it still leaves a receipt. The next day, she paid the first invoice in full. I didn't call to check. I didn't offer help. I just watched, from the same distance I had always loved her, from quiet, steady, and unshaken. Because now she knew. She knew what it meant to be loved by someone who never asked for a seat at the table, who gave without demand, and who stayed long after he was told to leave. 2 weeks passed after the call. Not a word. Not a text. Not a knock at my door. Just silence again. But this time, it felt different. Heavier. Not the kind of silence that pushes someone away, but the kind that draws them back, like the quiet after a storm, when people finally notice what's been standing all along. I didn't expect her to call again. I had said my piece. She had asked her question. But a father's heart, no matter how bruised, keeps its ear open for the sound of return. So when my phone buzzed again, late on a Sunday afternoon, and her name lit up the screen, I didn't hesitate. I answered. Her voice was small, too small for someone who once ran through my house in princess gowns, commanding everyone's attention. "Dad," she said softly. That word. That one word. I hadn't heard her say it in so long that it nearly broke me open. "I went through everything," she continued, her voice cracking. "The receipts. The names. The bridal shop, they told me." She paused. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. And I did. I believed she hadn't realized. I believed she had been caught in a tide of other people's voices, her mother's, her stepfather's, her friends', and somewhere along the way, she forgot what mine sounded like. But now, in the quiet aftermath, when the decorations were packed away and the applause had faded, she could finally hear me again, even without speaking. "I've been sitting with it all," she whispered, "and I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "You called. That's enough." But then she did speak, and not just with words, but with silence. A silence full of regret, full of everything she couldn't yet bring herself to say. She didn't cry. Not then. She just asked, "Can I come over?" I told her yes. Of course yes. She showed up an hour later, wearing one of the old sweatshirts she used to steal from my closet back in high school. Her hair was tied up, no makeup, her wedding ring barely visible. She looked like my daughter again. Not the bride who'd walked down an aisle without me. Not the stranger I had watched from a screen. But the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching my arm like it could keep the whole world steady. We didn't hug. Not right away. She stood in the doorway for a moment too long, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. But then I opened my arms, and she fell into them like she had never left. She cried then. Not loud, but deep. The kind of crying that lives behind years of pride. And I didn't say a word. I just held her. Let her fall apart. Let her return. We sat on the porch afterward, her knees tucked beneath her like she used to do as a teenager. "I was angry," she said. "I don't even know why anymore. I think I just believed things that weren't true." I nodded. I didn't need her to explain. I had lived through it. "Sometimes," I said, "people only see the version of love that screams the loudest. And mine was never loud. It was just always there." She looked at me with eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry, Dad." That's when I let myself breathe again. It wasn't about the wedding. Not really. It was about the slow drift, the invisible line that had grown between us over the years, stretched thin by silence, pride, and time. But it hadn't broken. Not completely. And now, here she was, reaching across it. We didn't fix everything that day, but we started. She helped me make dinner that evening. We didn't talk much while cooking, but something had shifted. The silence was no longer a wall. It was a bridge, and I could feel her trying, in her own quiet way, to walk across it. Before she left, she stood at the door and turned back. "I know I can't erase what I did," she said, "but I'll do better, if you'll let me." I looked at her, my daughter, grown and finally aware, and I smiled. "You were never erased," I said. You just forgot I was written on every page. And that was the truth. I had been there, all along, in the smallest lines, the quietest spaces, the forgotten corners of her story. And maybe now, she was finally ready to read them. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the quiet sacrifices made by those who love us without needing recognition. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that speak to the heart. And in the comments below, tell us, have you ever been loved silently? Your story might just inspire someone else to reach out before it's too late.